Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's, well, likely crossed your mind if you've ever worked with others, led a team, or even just trying to have a productive conversation, really.
Uh-huh.
How to give and receive feedback that actually helps. You shared excerpts from Kim Scott's Radical Candor, and wow, it's absolutely packed with practical insights on this.
Exactly. And our mission here in this deep dive isn't just to summarize the book, right?
Yeah.
We really want to unpack the core principles of radical candor, get into why they matter in our day-to-day, and pull out strategies you can actually start using, like immediately.
Yeah, looking at why our usual ways of giving feedback often just fall short.
Yeah, and exploring the alternatives Scott proposes. Some are surprisingly effective, all aimed at helping you become, more informed and effective in how you communicate.
So the big idea, it's right there in the title, radical candor. But it's more than just like brutal honesty, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's about finding that specific crucial balance between genuinely caring personally about people and being willing to challenge them directly. We really need to dig into why you need both and what goes wrong when that balance is off.
And Scott uses a ton of personal stories, right?
Yeah.
From her time at Google, Apple.
Yeah, exactly. To bring these ideas to life,
Yeah.
we'll draw on those real-world examples to make it all stick. I mean, think about it. Leading teams with tenfold revenue growth, managing thousands.
Yeah.
She's seen what works.
And what doesn't, crucially.
And what doesn't. Absolutely.
So maybe we should start with why giving and getting feedback feels so darn difficult in the first place. It touches on some deep stuff like social conditioning, fear of, being seen badly.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Then we can dive into Scott's framework, those 4 quadrants.
Right.
Radical candor, obnoxious aggression.
Ruinous empathy, manipulative insincerity. Yeah. We could break down each one, maybe use examples from the book, even her own slip-ups and what she learned.
Absolutely. And then get into the nitty-gritty, the practical stuff. Like, how do you actually ask for feedback effectively? Because that's half the battle, isn't it? And how to deliver guidance so it's clear, but also shows you care. Plus, fostering that culture of open communication in a team or even just in personal life.
And she touches on cultural differences too, right? Israel,
That's
Japan.
some fascinating perspectives there on how communication norms can vary quite a bit.
Okay. So ultimately, this deep dive should give everyone a clearer picture of radical candor and how it can genuinely change how we communicate and build relationships, work, and personally.
That's the goal.
Let's get right into it then. Scott kicks off by highlighting just how tough delivering negative feedback can be. What were some of the core reasons she initially struggled with this herself?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that, especially her story about an employee she calls Bob. She lays out a few connected reasons. First, well, she just genuinely liked Bob.
Right, the human element.
Exactly. Didn't want to hurt his feelings, especially since he seemed maybe a bit on edge already. That's just a natural human thing, wanting to avoid causing discomfort. She also admits she made assumptions. Kind of hoped he'd just figure it out on his own, based on his past good work.
Ah, the hope they'll self-correct strategy.
Yeah. And let's be honest, something we can all fall into. It just felt quicker in the short term to fix the problem herself instead of investing the time in guiding him.
That time pressure thing is so real. Easy to see how that becomes the default path. But what happened? What were the consequences of her avoiding that direct feedback with Bob?
See, this is where it gets really interesting, where the core of radical candor starts to take shape. Scott stresses that her attempts to be nice by holding back criticism actually did Bob a massive disservice.
How so?
Well, even though he probably sensed things weren't great, her lack of clear feedback meant he didn't have the actual information he needed to improve. It created this sort of disconnect.
Between his perception and reality.
Exactly. By not tackling the issues directly, she basically removed any real incentive for him to grow, lulled him into a false sense of security, you could say.
Yeah.
She learned the hard way that being overly empathetic, avoiding necessary criticism, can really backfire long-term for the person.
It really boils down to that fear, doesn't it? Fear of being the one delivering bad news. Scott mentions that almost universal desire to be liked.
Oh, absolutely. She points out how we're often raised with things like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Good intentions, maybe, But
But then you become a manager.
right, and suddenly your job requires you to do something that feels like it goes against all that lifelong conditioning. It's a pretty big mental hurdle for a lot of people.
Now, Scott worked at some major places, Google, for instance. How did her time there, especially working for someone like Sheryl Sandberg, shape her thinking on feedback?
Google was clearly huge for her. She felt the culture there was really about creating a place where people enjoyed work, felt community.
Hmm.
But the Sandberg experience seems particularly key. Scott tells this story about a presentation she gave to the CEO and founders. It went pretty well overall, but Sandberg pulled her aside right after, for maybe 2 minutes.
And what happened in those 2 minutes? Sounds like a defining moment.
It was incredibly effective because of how direct yet supportive it was. Even though the presentation was a success, Sandberg didn't ignore this one key thing Scott could improve.
Which was?
She pointed out Scott said, way too much, like excessively. So it made her sound less smart than she was.
Ouch. But direct.
Very direct, no beating around the bush. But here's the crucial part. Sandberg also clearly conveyed belief in Scott's potential. Said something like, "You're going to have an amazing career here."
Ah, okay.
And she focused on the behavior and its impact. You sounded stupid, not you are stupid. Big difference.
Huge difference.
And then she offered concrete help, suggesting a speech coach. So Scott didn't feel attacked. She felt motivated, and it really influenced how she started giving guidance herself.
That perfectly highlights that balance we mentioned earlier, right? Directness, but wrapped in genuine support. Now, Scott contrasts Google with Apple. What insights did she pick up there, especially about team dynamics?
Right. At Apple, she taught this Managing at Apple class. Even senior leaders found it valuable. And one leader pointed out something fundamental Scott had missed before.
What was that?
Scott had always kind of focused on nurturing the people most likely to get promoted, assuming everyone wanted that upward climb.
A common assumption.
Very. But this Apple leader stressed the huge value of stability and introduced these terms: rock stars and superstars.
Rock stars and superstars. Okay, intriguing. Tell me more about what those mean in this context.
Sure. Think of rock stars as the team members who are absolutely brilliant at their current job. They love it. And they're on maybe a more gradual growth path. They're the solid foundation. Dependable, deep expertise. Critical.
Got it. Not necessarily chasing the next rung on the ladder.
Exactly. Then superstars are the ones on that really steep growth curve. Driven by learning, new challenges, they'd get bored doing the same thing a year later.
Oh, okay.
And the point was, a healthy, high-performing team needs a balance of both. You need that stability and that dynamic growth.
That's a really useful way to think about it. It shifts the perspective away from just upward mobility being the only goal. Ties into understanding individual motivations, which she also talks about, right?
Exactly right. She shares that story about hiring diamond cutters in Moscow early in her career. She initially assumed money was the main driver for everyone. But she quickly learned that understanding their personal situations, anxieties about leaving home, family stuff, and connecting with them as humans, using her background in Russian literature, surprisingly.
Really?
Literature. Yeah.
That was key to building trust. She realized her own humanity wasn't a weakness professionally, it was actually a major asset. So this idea of caring personally, it really seems foundational to the whole radical candor thing. How does she define it in practice? What does it actually look like day to day?
Well, for Scott, caring personally is way more than just being polite or professional. It means genuinely giving a damn about the people you work with as whole people.
Beyond just their job function.
Totally. Recognizing they have lives, concerns outside work, building real relationships, understanding their needs, hopes, even struggles. Fred Kaufman, her coach at Google, had that mantra: bring your whole self to work.
Right.
And that captures it. Showing your own vulnerability sometimes, maybe admitting you're having a bad day, creating space for others to do the same. It's not oversharing, but it is acknowledging our shared humanity.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the other absolutely critical piece is challenging directly. What does that involve in practice?
Challenging directly is about having the courage, really, to tell people when their work isn't hitting the mark. And just as importantly, when you think they can do even better.
So having the tough conversations.
Exactly. Stepping up. Scott's very clear. For criticism to work, it has to be clear, specific. Explain why something isn't working and offer guidance on how to improve.
Right.
She contrasts vague stuff like, your work's just not good enough, which can easily slide into that obnoxious aggression, with constructive criticism aimed at helping the person actually get better and develop their skills.
It definitely feels like a fine line, doesn't it, between direct and just, or being a jerk. That's where her four-quadrant framework comes in to help navigate it.
Precisely.
Let's dig into those quadrants. The ideal, obviously, is radical candor. What really defines feedback coming from that top right spot?
Yeah. Radical candor, top right, that's the sweet spot. It's where you successfully combine caring personally with challenging directly.
The magic combo.
It is. The feedback is kind in its intent, but crystal clear in its message. It comes from a genuine desire to see the other person grow and succeed. It's not about trying to be liked or sugarcoating things. It's being clear because you care.
Like that story with her dog.
Exactly. The stranger say, "It's not mean, it's clear."
Yeah.
That became her mantra. Directness, rooted in care, is ultimately kinder than just letting things slide.
Okay. Now, what if you have the challenging directly part down, but you're missing that caring personal foundation? That puts us in obnoxious aggression.
Thought on upper left quadrant, obnoxious aggression. Here, the feedback is direct, maybe even brutally so, but it feels harsh, impersonal, maybe even demeaning, because that care is missing.
Examples.
Scott mentions managers who might belittle people publicly, use criticism to humiliate. It might get short-term compliance through fear, maybe.
Of a long-term cost?
Huge. Damages trust, tanks morale, leaves scars. She even uses her own critical email to Larry Page about some policy as an example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she sent it without fully getting his reasoning, did it pretty publicly. She called it front stabbing. Better than backstabbing, maybe, but still damaging. Lacked humility, wasn't helpful, felt personal.
Okay, now flip it. What if you prioritize caring personally so much that you avoid challenging directly? That's ruinous empathy. What are the dangers there?
Lower right quadrant. Ruinous empathy. Here, you're so worried about feelings, about upsetting someone, that you hold back critical feedback even when it's needed.
Like with Bob.
Exactly like with Bob.
Well,
It
yeah.
feels kind in the moment, but like we saw, it cripples growth. Can even lead to worse outcomes later, like getting fired because they never get the chance to improve.
And praise in this quadrant isn't great either.
Right. Ruinously empathetic praise is often just about making someone feel good, not about specifically highlighting what was excellent so they do more of it. Lacks clarity for real development.
And then the worst spot, bottom left, manipulative insincerity. You don't care and you don't challenge. Sounds pretty toxic.
It really is the worst of all worlds. Feedback here, if any is given, lacks genuine care. It's often driven by self-interest or just avoiding conflict at all costs.
Destroys trust.
Completely. Creates confusion, resentment. Scott uses her own insincere apology to Larry Page after that aggressive email as an example. She didn't really get why it was wrong, just wanted to smooth things over. He saw right through it.
Yikes.
This quadrant also includes stuff like false praise, backhanded compliments, just gossiping behind people's backs.
Yeah.
Really damaging stuff.
So the framework gives us a really clear map of these styles and their impact. Now let's shift gears to the practical side. How does Scott suggest we actually get better at both giving and receiving guidance, aiming for that radical candor sweet spot?
Okay, one of the very first things, and it's so vital, actively solicit feedback yourself, especially criticism.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Definitely, but crucial. She gives that great example from Michael Deering, the anonymous orange box for questions and feedback.
Right, creating psychological safety.
Exactly. Especially at first. People felt safer giving honest opinions without direct blowback. Then, over time, as Deering showed he'd actually address things without punishment, people got more comfortable being direct.
Makes sense.
Scott also suggests a simple check. Keep a mental tally, or even write it down. How often do you get praise versus criticism? If it's all praise, that's a huge red flag people are probably holding back.
That's a good practical self-check. What about actually delivering feedback? Any specific techniques or frameworks she recommends?
Yes, she outlines a really useful tool, the Situation Behavior Impact Framework,
SBI.
SBI.
Okay.
Super helpful for impromptu guidance, praise, or criticism. You state the specific situation, describe the specific behavior you saw, and then explain the impact it had.
So it keeps it concrete.
Exactly. Focused on actions and consequences. Feels less personal, more objective. For praise, it makes it specific, not just generic fluff. For criticism, it helps the person see the direct results of their actions.
The timing of feedback also seems really key in her view. Immediacy matters.
Hugely important. She really stresses giving guidance quickly, informally if possible, right after the event.
Why is that so much better?
Well, if you wait, details get fuzzy, right? And the emotional impact, good or bad, fades. She advocates weaving these feedback moments into regular interactions, quick chats, check-ins between meetings. It's often more powerful and, honestly, more time efficient than scheduling formal sessions weeks later.
And the whole public versus private thing, how does she suggest navigating that? Praise versus criticism.
Her general rule is pretty clear. Praise publicly, criticize privately.
Okay, why that way?
Public praise is great recognition for the individual, plus it motivates others, shows them what good looks like. Private criticism creates a safer space. Less potential embarrassment, makes the person way more receptive to actually hearing the feedback and discussing improvements without feeling put on the spot.
That makes sense. Personalization is another trap she warns about, making it feel like a personal attack. How do we avoid that?
Yeah, she mentions the fundamental attribution error, that tendency we have to blame someone's personality instead of considering the situation.
Right. They're lazy versus the deadline was missed.
Exactly. So instead of broad judgments, focus tightly on the observed behavior and its impact. She shared that small but powerful example, a colleague shifting from saying, "You're wrong," to, "I think that's wrong."
Subtle but significant.
Totally. It sounds more humble, less like an indictment of the person, using phrases like, "That approach didn't quite get the result," or "This report could be stronger if," keeps the focus on the work, not the person's character.
Scott also made some interesting points about adapting communication across different cultures. What were some key takeaways there?
Yes, her global experience was eye-opening for her. Radical candor needs thoughtful adaptation. For instance, in Israel, she found communication very direct, almost blunt sometimes by other standards, but often seen as respectful there.
Okay.
But trying that same style in Tokyo probably wouldn't work well. Japanese culture values politeness and directness, avoiding public contradiction. So there, she found encouraging politely persistent feedback was better.
So it's not one size fits all globally.
Not at all. Even within seemingly polite cultures, like Britain, she noted a strong tradition of direct debate in professional settings. The key takeaway is, the core principles care personally, challenge directly, are universal. But how you express them, tone, directness, setting, needs careful tailoring to the cultural context to actually be effective.
Finally, she emphasizes this isn't a one-and-done thing. Building these relationships in this culture takes ongoing effort. What are some longer-term strategies?
Yeah, it absolutely has to start with you being genuinely open to getting feedback yourself. Creating that two-way street is fundamental for trust.
Leading by example.
Definitely. She strongly suggests regular one-on-ones where the employee sets the agenda, gives them the dedicated space to raise issues, share perspectives, and for you to just listen and understand.
That's powerful.
And having deeper career conversations, too. Understanding individual dreams, long-term goals, aspirations, then trying to align opportunities with those, which links back to the rock stars and superstars, right?
Right, managing them differently.
Yeah, making sure your rock stars feel valued for their consistent excellence, even if they aren't climbing the ladder fast. It's all about building that foundation of trust through consistent actions that show you genuinely care about their well-being and growth.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into radical candor, what are the main nuggets people should really take away? First, it seems to be that core duality, caring personally while challenging directly.
Absolutely. Recognizing that all effective guidance, praise, or criticism has to come from a genuine place of caring about the other person's growth and well-being.
And we definitely explored the dangers of those other quadrants, obnoxious aggression's short-term damage.
The stagnation from ruinous empathy and the total trust killer that is manipulative insincerity. Scott's own stories, like the incident or the Bob situation, really hit home how bad those are and how powerful finding that radical candor spot is. Sheryl Sandberg's feedback is like the perfect example.
And the emphasis on soliciting feedback, especially criticism, really stood out.
Huge theme, her experiences. Things like the orange box, or just directly asking. They all point to needing that two-way street for guidance. It builds trust, self-awareness. Like she says, if you only ever hear praise, something's probably wrong.
We also hit on practical strategies. The SBI framework, situation, behavior, impact, to keep feedback focused.
Right. Giving it promptly, praising publicly, criticizing privately, generally, and avoiding personalization, focusing on the worker behavior, not the person's character. That little shift from "you're wrong" to "I think that's wrong" carries so much weight.
And finally, that idea of understanding individual growth paths, the rock stars and superstars, valuing both.
Yeah, seeing people as individuals with unique motivations, moving beyond one-size-fits-all communication. It allows for much more tailored, effective interactions.
So as people reflect on this, maybe think about where your own style falls on that framework, leaning too much on empathy, maybe? Shying away from directness.
Or maybe challenging directly, but needing to show more care. Scott's framework is a great lens for self-assessment, not just evaluating others. It's a roadmap for improving our own interactions.
And it's an ongoing thing, right?
Ah,
Not a quick fix. Scott compares it to brushing your teeth.
exactly. Needs conscious effort, vulnerability, willingness to adapt. So maybe think about one small step this week, one piece of feedback you could give, maybe, or one area where you could be more open to receiving criticism.
We really hope this deep dive offered some valuable insights and practical tools you can use.
Yeah. Radical candor isn't just some management jargon. It's really a framework for building stronger, more effective, more trusting relationships through clear, direct, and caring communication. So maybe go out and consider how you can bring a little more radical candor into your world.